I think maybe just because it was towards the end, Nikki, should we pick up on the US versus English
Yes, yeah,
conversation?
definitely. Yeah.
Because we had a quick discussion about that, didn't we, a
Hmm.
few days ago,
We
about
did.
different stress patterns, different sounds of words, emphasis, etc., etc. Do you want to say something about that? Oh, here comes my kitten. Sorry.
Yes, absolutely. First of all, Susie, thank you so much for that presentation. It was really, really, really informative. So yeah, thanks a lot for that. So yeah, we did have a chat a few days ago, didn't we? Perhaps the first thing that I should say is maybe some of the keen beans with a good ear in the audience may recognize that I do not have a standard British accent. So I do not have RP, so I am actually Welsh. I'm Welsh British, and I'm based in Cardiff. So, and in fact, another super interesting little piece of information is that Susie is also Welsh and grew up not very far away from where I am now. But Susie has sadly not been living in Wales for
Yeah, I've
quite a while.
become posh apparently. You know,
Hmm.
I've gone all English now. Although
Hmm.
I'm actually really interested to hear, because often if I've been speaking to my mum or my sister on the phone for an hour,
Hmm.
I'm really it'll be really interesting actually for the participants and Gabby to notice after, like, 45 minutes of chat between me and Nikki, if I start
Yep,
to sound a bit more lilty from the valleys again by the end of our
exactly.
by the end of our webinar today.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see, Susie, if we can keep it within 45 minutes, because Welsh people are incredibly chatty. That is part of our national characteristics. So, if we're still here in about 2 hours and
Yep,
everyone
that's
else
it.
has left
Sorry,
the room,
everybody.
just leave us to it. Okay. So back to the
American and
topic
English,
in
yes.
hand. Yeah. So American English, British English. So we talked quite a lot, didn't we, about the fact that we're often asked what's better. I think this was a really interesting point. So students are often very concerned about, oh, well, should I learn British English? Should I learn American English? Should I learn a different type of English? Because obviously there are lots of different types of English. And I think the first thing that we wanted to be sure that we got across to people was that there is no one type of English that's better than
Absolutely.
another type of English. But of
Absolutely.
course, what is the case is that very often intonation and stress is different. So obviously, Susie, you mentioned about the sort of steppy, bouncy intonation of Americans. So I'm talking about United States Americans.
Mhm.
And yeah, and people who from Wales, for example, like myself, the language, the intonation is a lot more sing-songy. So we talked about, I know Susie's mentioned this sort of semicircle, and we talked about the fact that so I'm going to call it Wenglish, Welsh English. That's what we call it locally, Wenglish. It is a semicircle, but it's like a fluctuating semicircle. So it kind of goes up like that, then down, and then up a little bit, and then down. Yeah. So that's more our common intonation patterns. And then, of course, to
Semicircle
go,
with squiggles on top, isn't it?
yeah, squiggly
Semicircle.
semicircle.
Yeah, that's squig. I love that. See, we're inventing words in our Wenglish, left, right, and centre, aren't we?
A squiggly semicircular form of
Wenglish.
English, of
Yes.
Wenglish. Yeah, that's Wenglish. Yeah. So yeah, and when it comes to, say, if we think about American stress patterns, that's when it becomes, I think, very, very interesting. So we talked about words like adult or adult, these kinds of words where where the stress is on a different part of the word, and that is quite interesting. And of course, because we consume a lot of American English. And of course, some of our participants, they will be watching from other countries. That they'll also be watching Netflix, these kinds of things, where the vast majority of the input material is in American English. You
Mm.
will notice these different stress patterns. So yeah, that they would
Yeah.
be my opening comments.
Absolutely, and just being mindful as well that I mean, as Nikki said, we are consuming a lot of American culture. So certainly in British English, words like movie are perfectly standard these days.
Mm,
Nobody thinks twice about, oh no, you should be saying film. The
no.
same thing with laundry. Laundry is actually a
Yeah.
much more effective way of saying chores, as opposed to, oh, I must wash my clothes in my washing machine. So there's a lot of kind of like crossover of vocabulary as well as word stress and
Mm,
intonation. Just watch
mm.
out for maybe a couple of things that might be different. We picked up on, in the UK, you might wrap your sandwiches in aluminium foil.
Ah,
In
true.
American English, what do they call it?
Aluminum.
What a made-up word that is. Yeah, aluminum. Okay.
And actually, Susie mentioned podcasts at the end of the session. Now, I mean, this is a personal point, but I'm a massive fan of podcasts. I listen to many podcasts, and I'm always recommending them for my students because I think they're such a great tool, and not necessarily ones that focus on an English language point. Try to find a podcast that your students might just be interested in. So a few weeks ago, a student I've known for years, I realized she's a fan of true crime and thrillers and this kind of thing. And for the last couple of weeks, she's been consuming lots of true crime podcasts, and her general intonation, stress patterns, pronunciation in general has improved massively over the last couple of weeks. So podcasts are a big thumbs up. But
Brilliant.
On the weekend, just before I spoke to Susie, I was listening to a podcast, an American podcast, and they were talking about different niches, people with different niches in their professions. And I was listening and listening. I was like, what is this word? Is in me? And then I realized the penny dropped, and they were saying niche. Okay, so, and Susie and I talked about the fact that we hope British people are a little bit better at pronouncing French words. Say croissant, Susie, go on. Oh, look at that. And how did, and how,
I used to live in France, and croissant was a very important part of my life,
Okay.
And then there's lots of jokes, aren't there, about the Americans like mangling things and asking for a croissant sandwich.
Croissant,
sandwich. But I mean, again, this is part and parcel of what Nikki and I are saying, that we as people need to be much more accepting of all the different English.
Absolutely.
And there isn't this idea of like superiority or this is better than this. Absolutely not. We're all working nowadays in a global society. We have international students. If you're in business, you have international clients. We're all listening to international programs. There's lots of crossover of words. Niche is just one example of a term that we've stolen from the French.
Exactly. So it's not even an English word anyway.
Exactly.
Really.
So as long as you can be understood, that's the most important thing. So I'm just picking up on something that was in the chat box there from Hedy. And I think Gabby mentioned it earlier as well, about the students having no awareness of intonation. So my feeling about this is that possibly teachers are scared of intonation, particularly if they are non-native English teachers themselves. Oh, I can see a couple of nods there. I'd love to hear from some of our participants as well, because obviously the great thing about gallery teachers is that we get to meet all of you who are out there who are working in lots of different contexts, and you've all got your own skills and experience and ideas and tips to share. So my feeling is that we should definitely expose students to intonation through podcasts or through movies or through TED Talks or through adverts. There's lots of different media that you can use. I don't mind, as I mentioned, exaggerating and over modeling, just so the students can get a sense of, this is how I talk when I am being an English robot. And then usually that makes them go, no, teacher, I don't want to sound like this. And I'm like, well, unless you move your voice, you do. So, we can have like a lot of fun and games in the classroom. And I make my hand the robot, so if they are speaking like this, then I just do my robot voices. And then the aim of the game is to try and make me do my little snake action. So, play with it. It can be lots and lots of fun. It doesn't have to be serious. And if you're working with young learners, even better. They don't have to know that it's intonation. It's just about, playing music with your voice. And if it's brought into their awareness really, really young, then that is just going to be a firm foundation from which they can grow as they progress through their English language learning channels and hopefully the English levels as well. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, Nikki, as well, given that you work in Wales.
Absolutely,
we talked a bit about emphasis and volume as well, didn't we, as being something that might be interesting for students to notice, to raise awareness of.
Yes, so I'm just reading through Gabby's last comment in the chat box as well. So first of all, I can't stress enough how much I agree with Susie's point about how important it is to model, to have fun. And I think that this might also be part of the reason why people sometimes feel a bit reluctant, is because the maybe teachers don't want to feel like they're being a bit of a clown in front of the classroom, or that they have to be very serious. Okay. And it is quite important to try to find a way to sort of get over that, and to try to gamify as much of the intonation and stress patterns as possible, because really I believe very strongly that modeling is very, very important. And if you are a non-native speaking teacher and you're a newer teacher, and there are some great resources out there, some books with diagrams where you can actually show what the mouth should do, show the students what their mouth should do. So if you feel a little bit self-conscious about doing it yourself, and also sort of listening and repeating is also extremely good. But really, yeah, it's a way to try to find a way of doing the modeling. And if you're a non-native speaker and you feel a bit concerned about this, you might decide to, okay, so I'm going to teach a couple of different phrases today, and we're really, I'm going to get my intonation very good at that, and then I'm going to teach those, and another day a couple of different phrases, and sort of slowly build up your own personal bank of kind of teaching techniques.
Yeah, I think that's super important. Just sorry to interrupt there, Nikki. I think that is really important. That obviously I'm really mindful that, as a CELTA trainer, we teach like a 90-minute session on intonation. We're not suggesting that you go into your lessons with your learners and spend 90 minutes on intonation, stress, and pronunciation. But exactly as Nikki was saying, like imagine your lesson is the cake, and then the pronunciation is going to be like, the hundreds and thousands, or the chocolate buttons, or whatever decoration you want sprinkled on top, so just a little bit on a regular basis. So I think little and often is the way to kind of like manage your own fear, and also feed it into your students at a pace that they can absorb.
Exactly. That I would agree with that 100%. Yeah, you wouldn't have a lesson that was, today we're going to work on this sound, for example, or this stress pattern, or it would, first of all, it would be incredibly boring for everybody. So it's more a case of just kind of peppering it through your lessons. Also, of course, you can get apps on phones where you can push a button and hear a sound or hear how a word is pronounced. So there's so many different ways of doing this. And so just Gabby has mentioned the fact that there's a lack of an awareness of the urgency. But I think what Susie mentioned about doing the robot, isn't that a dance from the 80s as well?
Yeah, the robot. I'm showing my age now. Thanks for that, Nikki.
Sorry. No, I was just thinking like doing the robot. Is kind of showing people, well, look, this is how you will sound if you don't use the right intonation. And another point is that actually you could communicate completely the wrong message if you use the wrong intonation with something, so there is quite a bit of urgency around it, I would say. So showing people as well how they could make errors if they don't use the right intonation or stress patterns also could be a little bit of a shocker into, okay, I better do that.
Yeah. And I think as teachers, all of us feel, we have a responsibility to our learners to help them as much as we can. And I think if we keep that as our objective, then hopefully we're not going to mind, like, making ourselves look silly for like 4 minutes a day in an English lesson. It's a kind of like, it's a really small price to pay for allowing our listeners to leave the classroom and not be misunderstood, or, absolutely offend people when they weren't intending to. So I really do think that, intonation is something that should be, embraced and laughed about, and not sort of like, worried about or frightened about. I'm just having a look at what Kathleen's commented on there. I think, yeah, some course books are really good at focusing on pronunciation, and others maybe not so much. And I think as well, in New English File, for example, they're really good at the phonemes and the vowel sounds and the consonant sounds. And then they do also a little bit of work on linking. And again, I think that's a really important thing to encourage our learners to be aware of right from the elementary level. At elementary level, typically they're quite hesitant. They're not that fluent. And so we can't expect them to be linking sounds themselves, but we can certainly expose them through our own models and through, models on the CD, and then models on TED Talks or podcasts or adverts. So they understand that that's what they're aiming for, and it doesn't have to be stressful at all. I think you're absolutely right. I think non-native teachers, in my experience as a CELTA trainer, we get an awful lot of non-native teachers coming onto CELTA courses, which is brilliant, because why wouldn't you want to encourage people to have job opportunities, or want to travel? That's fantastic. And often they do have this inferiority complex, and I work so hard as a trainer just to make them so aware that they've got advantages that often our native speakers just do not have. So the non-native speakers, for example, know 250% times more about language than any man off the streets. When I did my CELTA 154 million years ago, if somebody had said to me, what's a past continuous, I would have been like, couldn't tell you. Or if somebody had said to me, do you know what a minimal pair activity is? Nope. And I've got through my life perfectly well without it. Thanks. So I always encourage the non-native speakers on my CELTA course to buddy up with the native speakers, because they've got such a wealth of knowledge and information and experience and empathy with learners, and what have our native speakers got? An English accent, maybe. It's a bit of an imbalance, I find. I really do. And I think, okay, that's a good point, Hetty. You can certainly ask native speaker teachers to help you with intonation. But again, me and Nikki can start an argument about, well, Scouse English versus Scottish English versus Wenglish versus Bristolian English versus the London Cockney English. Like, who are you asking to help you? I said to Nikki my little story about when I was working in Vietnam. The CELTA office was quite near a classroom, and I could hear a Scouse teacher drilling a class full of like 10-year-old Vietnamese students to say, upstairs, upstairs. In quite a particularly Liverpudlian accent. I found it adorable. I love the idea of a bunch of like little 10-year-olds running around Vietnam going, I'm going upstairs, mummy, to play. I think that's just darling, absolutely darling. So why wouldn't we encourage a variety of accents and patterns? No human being is the same as any other human being. And shouldn't we celebrate that rather than trying to create like little English robots? Again, the robot analogy, no robots, no robots, people, let's teach people, not robots.
I think just one of the other things you mentioned in the presentation, Susie, was question tags, and I'm just trying to think of some really practical, basic ways that teachers, particularly non-native teachers who may not be as confident to teach intonation, can start to teach intonation from the word go. And I think question tags are quite a good way of doing that, because you have this sort of rising or falling intonation. And even if we're talking about a very basic, one of the first classes, do you like football? So don't just teach do you like football, teach them you like football, don't you? Or you like football, don't you? Yeah. So that can be done from the very, very, very beginning. So question tags are fantastic because they kind of span all these different levels, because they can go from very basic auxiliaries like do and don't, all the way through to the wouldn't use, hadn't use. They can get quite tricky when we get into various perfect tenses, conditionals, etc. But at a very basic level, and then you're introducing intonation from sort of from the word go. So
yeah, and I think it's really important as well, as Nikki said, that you're doing it on a functional level. That's in, let's make this conversation interactive and interesting, as opposed to let's learn English and then spread intonation on top. So I'm just picking up on what Gabby's put in the chat box about some teachers may believe that teaching intonation is a futile waste of time. So I'd be really interested to hear other people's opinions about this. I don't believe that to be the case. However, if a teacher has got super strong opinions about it, I don't feel I should waste my time converting them. What I would say is maybe let's have a conversation with our exams expert and think about how the pronunciation and intonation can maybe pay off when students are possibly taking some important speaking exams in their future.
Is that am I the exams expert?
That'll be you, yeah.
Oh, right, okay, fine. I was thinking, is there someone else coming? Oh no, that's me. Great. No, I am the exams expert, so that's good. Okay, so a couple of things here. So intonation is absolutely key. I'll give two examples. The first example I'm going to give is from a Spanish businessman that I've been teaching over the phone for years and years and years. We had an emergency session on Monday morning because he had an extremely important call with a potential client, very big potential business for him. And we have worked really, really hard on his intonation and trying to make his voice flow in a more interesting way, because it is extremely flat. And basically, there was nothing wrong with his language. There was nothing wrong with his grammar. It was Monday morning was all about trying to basically work on his intonation to make him sound more engaging, to make him sound more interesting to the person who was going to be on the other end of the phone. And we did it, and I believe he got the contract, so that's good news. But really, the point I want to make about that, so that's a business person, a business context. It's really important, because if your voice is not engaging, then people may not want to buy your products. People may not want to have that conversation with you or whatever. So that's the first thing. And English does have these different patterns, as Susie has worked really hard to point out in this talk. So it is really important on a functional professional level. Now, if we come on to the exam side of things, I'll draw it back into IELTS. And if I think about the way that IELTS speaking is marked by the examiners, there is a column in the publicly available banned scriptures, which is for pronunciation. And what that basically, what the examiners talk about is something which they call chunking, which is all about the flow, the rhythm, the stress, the intonation, basically. And the examiners will award a band depending on how the flow of the language is. So basically, we're talking about intonation. And if somebody is trying to get a high score on IELTS, so say above 6, it's absolutely key. If they go in talking like the robot like this, or if it's just very off the intonation. So if it's unnatural, there are also parts in the banned scriptures that talk about unnatural speech, then they will be penalized for that. And the other thing, I know it's a little bit kind of slightly off this topic, but the mispronunciation of individual phonemes is also key to being able to achieve high scores on pronunciation of any of the mainstream English language exams that I deal with. So it's not futile. I think futile is the opposite end of the spectrum. So whether we're teaching people, because obviously we're teaching people because they want to get on in life somehow, that's why they're learning English, whether it's because they want to get on in the business world, in the academic world, or just to come across as an engaging and interesting person, intonation is front and center.
Tell them the hotel story, Nikki, to demonstrate how
Oh,
important it is.
okay, so yes, all right. So this is something else that Susie and I had a chat about. So this is something kind of connected as well to accents, okay, and the way different people, different nationality groups pronounce different words in English. And I had a Spanish student. He was an absolute beginner. He was an older gentleman, and he was cleaning rooms in a hotel, and he was at risk of losing his job because they kept on telling him that room dirty dree wasn't clean. And he couldn't understand what on earth room dirty dree was, because he thought he was cleaning all of the rooms, until we realized that the owners of the hotel were Irish, and they were actually saying room 33 and not dirty dree. So yeah, and I mean, and this was a genuinely, very upsetting situation for this guy. So yeah, that's a sort of well, it's not a mispronunciation, because that's how Irish people pronounce 33, dirty dree, because they don't make the th sound. So yeah, a little anecdote.
I used to work in Dublin, and that used to come up all the time when I was dealing with CELTAs of, we call them allophones, that there are accepted alternative versions of particular phonemes. So the TH combination is difficult to pronounce in lots of different countries, and certainly, like an average Brit might even say mother, father, and 1, 2, 3 instead of mother, father, and 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, so
in Ireland,
Essex,
yeah, exactly. They're going to say, mother, father, 1, 2, 3. So there are equally accepted versions. If, as a non-native speaker, you're worried about a particular phoneme or a particular sound, then usually if you're teaching from a course book, use the course book to model. Or you might find that within your classroom, there's a student that has, particularly good pronunciation. Use them as a model, so much the better. As a teacher and as a trainer, I never set myself up on this plinth of I am all knowing and all amazing. On good days, I'm relatively amazing, but I still don't know everything about everything. So if there are resources in the room like we have right now with all of you here, why wouldn't I use those resources? Why wouldn't I exploit you to the best of your ability? Because I want to learn new things every day as well.
And just about that, just to pick up on Michael's point about the fact that he meets resistance in the class. Okay, so this is, I think, a case of a bit like when we've talked about whether or not you teach general English in exam classes. Michael, maybe you need to be a little bit sneaky, and you can teach, you just don't tell people. If they think learning pronunciation, intonation, stress patterns, or is a waste of time, just don't tell them that that's what they're learning, because we're not suggesting that you do an entire lesson on intonation once a week or something like that. So you just start peppering it through your lessons, and you don't make a big deal about the fact we don't say, and now we're going to do intonation. Yeah, so it's just sort of introduced in a sort of a slightly sneaky way, and then hopefully you won't meet resistance, because it's a bit of smoke and mirrors. They don't really realize that that's what they're doing until they're really good at it, and then they get great exam results and they get all those business contracts, and then they'll say thank you very much, Michael. So
yeah, and I like Kathleen's idea as well about trying to gamify it. That's something that I've talked about previously, that depending on the context in which you're working and the cohort with which you're working with. So Nikki mentioned doing work with business people. Often I don't tell business people that we're going to play a game now, because they're very anti-games. You sell it as, this is a vocabulary revision activity, or this is an activity that's going to help you win that contract that you're pitching for on Monday. So you're doing exactly the same activity, but how you sell it is slightly different. So I'm curious, I guess, Michael, to find out a bit more about your context, about if you're working with adults, if they're in a particular business context. So maybe it is, as Nikki said, just like smoke and mirrors, and just pepper it in without actually drawing overt attention to it.
There are very few games that I play with young learners that I haven't played with adults. They're exactly the same games. I might just change, if there's some sort of visual material, change some of the visuals, but they're all the same, really. It's just it's smoke and mirrors, halo words, whatever you want to call them. It's how you sell it.
How you sell it. Yeah, absolutely. So Kathleen has mentioned a really good tip as well about recording themselves. I think that's fantastic advice, especially nowadays. Most people are carrying a smartphone with them at any given moment, so they've got those opportunities available. And I think really getting the learners to have a conversation and record themselves, and then it can be painful. You're right, Gabby. I've had to sit through myself giving webinars. Trust me, I know about painful. Okay. But I still think it's a really good awareness raising activity of, am I being understood? Are there particular sounds that are causing me problems that I really need to work on? And this relates to the exam techniques that Nikki and I were discussing earlier. We talked about avoidance, Nikki. Do you remember?
Yes, yeah. Okay, yeah. So I'm just reading Michael's comments as well about the fact that he's mainly teaching adults and executives. Okay, yeah. So that's a little bit like my current teaching experience. Lots of adults, lots of executives, people with high stakes, high pressure jobs. And yeah, absolutely. I see, very often those sorts of that profile of students, they want to get in, they want to get the job done, they've got like a little mental tick list in their own head of what they want to do. And I see now where you're coming from in terms of them thinking that intonation is sort of a bit unnecessary. So yeah, I think again it would go back to what Susie and I were saying about, it's about how you pitch it, and pitch it to them in a language that they can understand, which is, if you speak like this, I'm sure you're going to get more contracts or be better understood or whatever that is. So yeah, to come back to avoidance, I mean, there are certain sounds or certain stress patterns that are just incredibly difficult for people from certain with certain L1s. So I'm teaching a Chinese student at the moment for several hours a week, and she struggles terribly with the letter R, as many Chinese learners do. And she's going to be doing her IELTS soon, and she's insistent that if she has the opportunity, she wants to talk about the Aurora Borealis, which, as I saw Eddie's face, says, ooh, there's a lot of R's in Aurora Borealis. Okay, so, and
it's
I'm
hard
trying
enough to
to
say the
convince
best
her.
of times, isn't it?
Sorry, it's hard to
enough to say
say,
the
to be
best of
fair.
times.
And I'm trying desperately to convince her that she has to say Northern Lights, and Northern Lights is already really good. Okay. But you know, she's determined, and she's, teach me, please teach me how to say Aurora Borealis. She's got a bee in her bonnet about it, and we drill it, and so she can get good at it, and then we'll leave it 5 minutes and she'll say it incorrectly again. Yeah. So I genuinely think that there are some words that if people just find extremely difficult to pronounce, or some or always get confused, is it is it aluminium or aluminum or whatever, just avoid it. Just find another word
Cling
to
film.
say.
Cling film.
Cling film. I mean, I'm not sure it's a direct synonym, but a piece of metal you wrap around a sandwich. I mean, try to avoid. I mean, know those words, those sounds. I'm talking about in an exam context now, or in a very, a presentation or something like that. Teach a little bit of an avoidance tactics, because obviously our responsibility is to teach our students to be able to function in English to achieve what they need to achieve. Okay, yeah. So there isn't anything wrong with that.
Exactly. And learning synonyms and learning how to paraphrase is part and parcel of an exam technique anyway, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, great stuff. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions or any comments? I'm really mindful, as we said, us Welsh lasses, we'll chat for days if you let us. So were there any other kind of questions or comments that people watching wanted to bring up, especially if you're working in a non-native context? We'd love to hear from you, or any of your own favorite little ideas of activities, tasks. Thank you, Gabby. Yeah, I'm a massive fan of starting early, so elementary. Nikki mentioned, using question tags in conversation as a way to kind of start introducing intonation. So I'm definitely a big believer in introducing all aspects of pronunciation right from the get-go. Modeling how we expect our students to be able to interact and communicate with each other. And generally that means, at the very least, just moving your voice to indicate some kind of question. Okay, can we get Gabby speaking? I'm just mindful, Gabby, there could be some people listening who maybe aren't exactly sure what attitudinal intonation is. So maybe you'd like to say something about that. Oh, Christina has a favor to ask.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to ask you if you could be so kind to model the pronunciation of the word ran. So the past tense of the verb to run, and similar. It's quite difficult for me to model that for Spanish speakers.
What I tend to do is tell my students to imagine their mouth as an exploding firework. Okay, ran. So I try to sort of like model with my mouth as well as my hands. And if you can try to get them to do all three to show the pattern. So you've got things like ring, rang, rung, sing, sang, sung, ran, run. So if you can get them to maybe have a look at that pronunciation journey task that we looked at, that's great for practicing your minimal pairs on things like run, look at my mouth, run, versus ran. Do you see the difference? Ran, it's an exploding firework. Okay, again, over model, over exaggerate, but it'll get the job done and it'll mean that they're understood. Okay, so let's try it together, Christina. Are you ready? Exploding firework, ran.
Ran.
Okay, and what's the past tense of, where does the past tense of ran come from?
From run.
Yeah, perfect. Brilliant. Really, really distinct.
I didn't. I'm sorry. I panicked for a second there. I didn't understand what you meant.
That's my fault. I'm always like, go, go, go. I just go into trainer mode. I can't help it. I'm so sorry. I'm so
brilliant.
sorry. So
Thank you, Susie.
Try the exploding firework, and that seems to work for you. So I reckon you can sell that to your students.
Thank you so much.
You're really welcome.
So
Thanks
much
for participating. Okay, Gabby, should we hear from you about attitudinal intonation? That sounds ever so fancy pants, doesn't it?
Susie.
Hello.
Oh yes. Okay. So now, so really sorry. I feel like I'm being put on the spot here, but
I'm sorry.
Let me just no. That's okay. Let me just think. So yeah, because I mean, obviously intonation has different functions, right? And we typically teach grammatical intonation. So as you said, questions, yes, no questions, closed questions, open questions. This is something that we teach in the classroom. But then obviously there is the problem of this concept of the attitudinal intonation, which is effectively expressing feelings and emotions. So now, is this something that we can effectively teach in the classroom? Would you actually teach it? I know that there are often activities where you are supposed to express your, well, say it as if you were angry or tired, but then is it really not just wasting time, Susie? I mean, how do you feel about it? Because, I feel like this is the kind of intonation that learners get when they are exposed to authentic language. It's not something you can effectively teach in the classroom, can you?
Well, I disagree, Gabby. I think
you mentioned it.
I think it's
sorry.
I think it depends on what you're teaching. So for me, the thing that immediately springs to my mind is when I'm teaching functional language for suggestions.
Oh yeah, okay.
So when I'm teaching language for suggestions, do you fancy a pizza? Do you want to come to the pub? Would you like to see a movie? And then generally, when I'm teaching suggestions, I'll also encourage my students to think about the responses. So I'll elicit some polite responses for yes, please, and also some polite responses for no, thank you. Yep. All right. So what we'll do is we'll have words like yes, great, or sorry, I can't. Okay. And then what I would do is I would get my learners to ask me a question. All right. So for example, Gabby, ask me if I fancy a pizza later.
Susie, do you really fancy a pizza?
Yeah, great.
Yeah, you see, this is the problem with attitudinal intonation, that there is no right or wrong way of saying things, right?
But I think your students can hear that.
Susie, then this is the way I'll ask.
Do you not think that your students can hear if I say, yeah, great, that my words are saying something, but my intonation is giving a different meaning? And that's why the intonation is equally as important as the words. Because if I say, yeah, great, now Gabby's like, woohoo, great, we're going to go for pizza. And if I go, yeah, great, Gabby's thinking, oh crap, she doesn't really want to go.
You know what I'm actually thinking now. I mean, obviously, this is raising awareness, but then think about it. It's the same in every single language, right? I mean, every single language has this philosophy of expressing your emotions through intonation, right? But then the problem is that you actually mentioned it at the very beginning or in the slides, that different nationalities have a different way of expressing emotions. So what happens here is you effectively change, you not only teach students how to express emotions, you effectively change their personality. Because if my mother language, this is the way how we express I don't know, how we express excitement, okay, and then you tell me that it's different in English, then in a sense it's changing my personality. Sorry, I'm rambling here, okay, but it's It's because I feel that it's easy to teach grammatical intonation. It's really more difficult to tell students, to teach students how to express emotions, right? You can raise awareness, but can you really teach this?
That's a really interesting question. And I think, people like you and Hedy and probably like, Bilal and Christina are way better placed to answer that than me, because I'm not bilingual or trilingual. But I have had a lot of students say to me that when they are communicating in another language, they do sometimes feel like there's a shift in personality. And that's
Yeah.
not necessarily a bad thing. It could
No,
be that maybe they become more confident, or it could be until they reach a certain level of fluency, they may be like less confident. But I don't think we're asking students to change personality. I think what we're saying is if that you want to be understood when you're in the majority of English speaking countries, it's going to sound rude and impolite if you say to somebody, yeah, great, I've really fancy pizza
yes,
with you,
yeah.
compared to, yeah, great. Go
And
ahead,
I
Nikki.
think as well, no, yeah, sorry, I've just been listening. This is an extremely interesting
Isn't it?
conversation. We are at risk of being here for another
I
couple of
know.
hours. I was thinking, so my thoughts on this is we want to make sure that our students have a successful learning outcome. Okay, so if we think about a word like sorry, which is used a lot in the English language. So Susie's example of the pizza and great and whatever, it doesn't have a lot of consequence in a sense, because maybe somebody misunderstands if Susie does or doesn't want a pizza, but it's not, it doesn't have so much consequence. But maybe it's easier to teach people based around words that have a lot of implications, whether or not the intonation is right. So if we take a word like sorry, which is used a lot in British English, which is even different from American English. It's not used as much and it's used differently. There's a huge difference between going sorry and sorry and sorry. There's a huge difference there. And that's a word that we use a lot to convey quite precise meaning. And I know it's one of the things that students often say to me, why did that person say sorry when they were complaining? And sometimes, because I speak some Spanish, and sometimes I'll like translate it and people are like, you're apologizing and complaining? Then no.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't work in other languages like that. So words with consequences, that's what will help people to understand how important attitudinal intonation is, I think.
In my defense, I'm playing the devil's advocate.
Devil's advocate, yes.
A little bit.
I can see, I feel that.
No, but it's actually something that has been on my mind for some time, because I do feel like this attitudinal intonation is really very much related to your fluency as a speaker in a foreign language. So this is something that's rather difficult to teach at a really low level, I feel, but maybe I'm wrong. And I do agree with you that this should be taught in the classroom. Students need to know. I mean, it's very, very important. But it's just something that sometimes I feel that maybe, only maybe, it's not time wasted in the classroom, but it's just counterproductive very often, because if students don't do more, I don't know, if they are not autonomous as learners, and if they don't listen out for this intonation, and if they don't analyze how people express emotions in a foreign language, then it may be difficult for teachers to actually be effective in raising awareness in the classroom. But it's only maybe. As I said, I'm just, trying to, I'm just playing the devil's advocate.
For the people with the really young learners, I recently, at the start of the year, we were teaching a big group of students from Palestine who all teach young learners. And there was one teacher, she was absolutely fantastic. And she showed me a video where she got her little kids, 4 or 5 years old, to take a basic phrase like my name is Hamid, and they had to do it in 5 different with 5 different emotions. So my name is Hamid, like the angry, and my name is Hamid, really sad. And she had them like record themselves doing it, and they even did like costume changes to sort of put emotion behind their voice. So there was no focus on the language itself. They were just saying, my name is Hamid. But it was such a really effective little thing to do, and get them to video themselves so they could see it back, and they had so much fun. And I just thought that would be a fantastic thing to to do with kids, or with smaller kids perhaps.
Yeah.
Can I just say, Susie, can we just say something else? I mean, I know it's already time to finish, but I just feel like I have to say it. As a non-native speaker, as someone who speaks Polish, as this is my first language. I've lived in the UK for over 20 years, about 24 years. And I feel like, this is really my second nature. But at the same time, I know I often come across as someone, the way I speak is very blunt, let me put it like that, or very like maybe too direct, or very sometimes rude. So I feel like this is the intonation that is inherent in the Polish language. So now, if I lose this, then in a sense, I'm losing my personality, right? I feel like, if I don't have this, it's like it's part of my identity. So you see, that's the problem with intonation very often, that intonation is something that is part of individual learners' identity. Or maybe I'm just reading too much into this.
I think if you're attached to it, Gabby, you should do what feels authentic for you. Like often there's a cliche, and it's a cliche because it's true. I'm thinking about Russian speakers, for example, like very clipped, very strong with their English. German speakers, for example, always sound very like, time, time is of the essence. I mean, I'm very blunt. Hello, have you met me? And I don't think that that's a bad thing to be at all. And I think as well, as a teacher, if it's something that you don't really believe in, then I'm never going to force people to try and do something that they don't believe in. But I do think that you should expose the learners to what could happen if they don't. And that sometimes as a teacher means, finding another model if you don't feel convinced enough to model it yourself.
Yes.
I absolutely agree. Yeah.
And I've just put in the chat box as well, just for the record, Susie always wants pizza. Okay, just if Gabby's going to ask me, just for the record. And then as I'm really mindful of our time, I'm just going to show you. I'm just going to show you my parting shot.
Oh.
But he's settled now.
I would just like to say, in my best Wenglish intonation, we didn't really get around to this, but about how we stretch out some of the vowel sounds. I'm going to say that was fantastic. That was fantastic. It's been fabulous today, Susie, to be with you. So thanks you very much
for being with us, Nikki.
Thank you.
And thank you all the participants as well for your comments and for your presence, and for joining us today. Really hope that we'll see you at another webinar again soon.